Cosmo, where are you?
Eating his night treats. He's not on the job yet.
Oh, our
Funny.
mascot.
It's funny. He heard your voice though, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I gotta eat the treats first.
Well, hopefully he'll make an appearance.
I'm sure. I'm sure he will. It's
You getting him out for some hikes in the cooler weather over there?
yeah, yeah. We had a nice hike last Sunday, and I'm actually gonna do one tomorrow afternoon. I think because it's supposed to get
Yeah.
a little bit crummy on Saturday night and Sunday. So maybe some snow even on the side of
Uh,
town.
I've seen the snow in the mountains around us, but not has not come close to us yet. So, uh,
So good training week.
yeah, trying to keep things going. It's interesting. I ran into another athlete, Eric, at the pool today, and we were talking about spring races and how quickly spring races come up. Yes, we can train year round here in the Southwest, but it's still hard to train in some of this cold weather for us, if you want to call this cold. And the March races and the April races really have a way of sort of sneaking up on us and trying to get ready for that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. I've been on Zwift a lot because I'm still really not comfortable riding outside a lot. So I've been on Zwift a lot, and everybody's been complaining about the cold, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, minus 30 here, and but what a different world we live in that we could do this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
That exists, and I did a couple Zwift runs this week with
Hmm.
relatively good sized groups, and it's a different world than even
Hmm.
like I know Zwift has been around for 8 years, but it wasn't really popular until probably COVID.
Yeah,
And
right.
it used to be those people, especially living in places like that, they just didn't train in the winter, you know.
Hmm.
And even for us, like, man, I got all this winter gear, and I rarely wear it anymore
Yeah.
because I'm like, I'll just jump on the trainer, and it's way easier. And yeah, I mean, it is a thing, especially when we're talking, about some of the things we're talking about, like consistency,
Yeah.
right? The setup's always the same, and I don't have to worry about freezing and
Hmm. No,
stopping,
that
taking
that
the clothes
that
off.
is
Yeah,
yeah, that's so true. And when I did live in the Northeast, and in my first round of triathlons back in the 80s, 90s, I would always look at the spring results and the whatever the triathlon magazine was called at that time. And I always look at the results. I'm like, how are these people this fit at this time of year? Because it's so hard to get out and train, not only to bike, but even running outside. Because not everyone had a treadmill back then, and trying to even maintain some run fitness during the winter was, and then even into the early spring, that was hard.
it's funny because I've looked at some of these old triathlon magazines and articles. I just every now and then look at some older stuff, and a lot of them were like, okay, it's the winter, time to swim.
Yeah, right.
Focus. That was like the thing is like, okay, well, we know for sure we can get in the pool.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like you look at some of these, especially some of these older training plans too, like that was the thing. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
winter is focus,
Yeah.
and we don't really have to do that as much. I mean, we can, but
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be the thing anymore with the advent of
Yeah.
indoor training. Yeah.
Yeah, worldwide people can do, the indoor riding. I mean, obviously, and it's really, no, that's really opened up a lot of opportunities for people.
So one other thing I want to add is on Zwift and on, I think, Ruby. I don't know. Does Ruby have the ability to chat?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
So there was somebody that said something inappropriate on Zwift last week, and it was a
Uh-oh.
big group ride, like 700-800 people,
Hmm.
and I called them out on it.
Yeah.
And it was really quite funny. Well, it wasn't funny because they basically made mention of like women being bad drivers, and that's why they're not good on Zwift or something like that. I
Mm.
can't.
Mm.
And I was just like, oh man, I'm so upset.
Yeah, right, right, right.
Like, hey, there's no place on Zwift for like inappropriate.
Hmm.
And then he jumps back like, why are you so like soft? And then everybody came to my defense. It was
Oh,
amazing.
that's nice. That's good.
What a community.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, well, maybe when women can drive everywhere in the world, uh,
Hmm.
legally,
Yeah.
maybe this won't be such a sensitive topic.
Right, right,
And
right.
then and then he said something else silly, and then I'm kind of dirty on the internet, so I was like, I just feel like I need to call things out because I'm Zwifting right beside my daughter right now, and I think that it's important that she
Right.
sees that people
Yeah.
stand up for believe in.
And someone's daughter is there. Yeah.
Exactly. And then people are like, "Oh, so cool! You get a Zwift with your daughter." I'm like, "I don't have
Yeah.
a daughter,"
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they don't know that.
Yeah. No,
Hey, we gotta call out when things are wrong. When things are wrong.
no, and that's so, it's so good, especially when someone says something inappropriately, to be able to call them out. That's good. I mean, because you are creating a culture in your group, and that takes effort to be able to do that. So nice job.
Yeah, thanks. I was proud of myself. Like, I'm like, well, why are the other like 700 people? It's
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
But it's sometimes I'll tell you, sometimes it's hard to text or to type when you're
Yeah,
Zwifting.
yeah, right, right.
So I get that. But I was really like mostly happy. Like, I had so many people like give me private messages too, like, oh, thanks for saying something.
Nice.
And I was like, that's good. So it
Yeah,
made
yeah.
me so
That's good.
so when you're online and you're on these things, like, stand up for what you believe in.
That's right. Totally.
Especially like women in cycling. Like, we need more women in triathlon and more women in
Yeah.
cycling, and you know, all these efforts to get more women in our sport. I mean, we need to encourage, not discourage. Yeah.
No, because the number of women in long distance triathlon, especially, is not that great. And I was talking with someone the other day about the efforts to try to increase the number of women in triathlon, and I said, "Do you know what percentage of a race would be female athletes?" And there wasn't really an idea. And I said, in the U.S., maybe 25%. In
And
Europe, it may
worse in
be
Europe.
10 to 12%.
Yeah, it's worse in Europe, especially in long distance.
That's right. And so if you take a race of 2,500 people in Europe, that may be 250 women in that race.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unreal when you really stop and think about it, how that population really could be encouraged much more, or really um, races can adapt in different ways to encourage more diversity in participation.
Agreed.
And we can't always have these, hey, you're a bad driver type of people, or attitudes. You've got to be, really open to looking at a race population very differently.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Oh, yeah, let's move on from that.
Yeah.
We want to kind of continue on with some of these points we were talking about last week from Dr. Seiler, and we only got through 3 last week. Maybe we can get through 3 or 4 this week.
We'll see.
I think that some of them are kind of similar to what we talked about. So the next one was, and I like this one. Consistent and sustainable training process eats epic interval workouts for breakfast.
Love it.
So let me ask you this question, John, because I think I know a lot about how you train by now. How many epic interval workouts do you do?
Uh, well, I do come upstairs to do this podcast, so I do very little interval work. Um, if I look at my workouts over a month, maybe 5 to 10% will be any type of interval. Maybe not even that much, to tell you the truth.
And and I'd say you do less than most, and that's why
Hmm.
I asked you that.
Yeah.
And for our, in John, like, I know we don't always celebrate each other, but for those of you that don't know, I mean, John is a very successful triathlete. I
Mm.
mean,
Oh,
you are, and
oh,
you're on the podium on almost every race you do, and it's not because you do epic interval workouts.
no, that's right. Right.
It's because you consistently punch the clock.
Mm-hmm.
Every day you do some kind of training. You do. Like, but and so I think people get really caught into this world of, oh my gosh, I got to do my 5 by 5 by 5.
Right,
And
right.
if I don't do it, like, it's the end of the world, or my 2 by 15, or my two
Mm-hmm.
by 30, or whatever. We always have to keep in mind that the consistency will always trump
Yeah.
doing really hard interval workouts from time to time.
No, no, spot on. And you hit the nail right on the head. And, there is a lot of good research that high intensity interval training provides a strong training stimulus. There's no doubt that that's the case. But to be able to put in a season of triathlon, to be able to put in years, make it a lifestyle, the, the, the downright rule is exactly as Seiler is saying here. It's consistency of training. And you're right. I mean, that's how I approach it. I train today so I can train again tomorrow. And I really try to watch my intensity level. That's why I actually don't do a lot of group stuff too, because you get competitive and you want to, work against each other, and all of a sudden you're working a lot harder than you should be. And now you've got to lose a day or lose a step on the next training program or training day. And so consistency is so important. I think especially as we get older too.
And don't get me wrong, like I coach people and I have them do interval workouts, and they usually do one bike interval workout a
Yep.
week and run a week, but they're almost always protective. Like
Mm-hmm.
we think we talked about this before, like the run, a lot of the times it's a hill repeat.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's actually the safest way to do running intervals. And then the biking interval, almost always we keep it sub threshold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, once again, I think the research is pretty good on long distance athletes. Pushing up the FTP from the bottom is way more
Yep.
successful than
Mm-hmm.
trying to drag it up from the top. And that means what I mean by being over FTP.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, like every now and then we'll throw in some really short stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but oftentimes I do that actually for a mental boost rather than the physiologic boost.
Mm. How
Um,
so? Explain that a
well,
little bit.
because some people, not some, lots of people want to see what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, like I want to see how hard I can go for a minute.
Yep.
And then, like, okay, let's do that. And there that's people can gain pride out of that. Like this one person I'm coaching, they posted on their training piece. I couldn't help myself at the end of this one because it was intervals, but they
Mm-hmm.
were longer,
Yeah.
and I wanted to do to see what my maximum wattage was,
Yeah.
and it was more for like them inside,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And I'm like and if you're gaining joy,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Yeah.
that's a perfectly good thing to do.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't hurt. It doesn't necessarily hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the off season, like when
Mm-hmm.
we don't have the tests
Yeah.
along the way. And just so like people know, like one of my coaching philosophies is I don't do a lot of testing.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
testing I do is usually sub thresholds, like or like I want to know kind of aerobic zone. I don't really
Yep.
care about top end stuff because I feel that the test is. I mean, personally, I feel like the test is the race,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and we do. Most of the people that I work with do a lot of racing,
Right.
and so yeah, and people dread tests. Our
Mm-hmm.
students, John, they dread tests, right?
I know we were talking about that ahead of time, and yeah,
Talking about that,
it
and
was,
triathletes will too.
yeah.
If you say, hey, this weekend we're doing an FTP test.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man, like Saturday's an FTP test. On Wednesday, they're already not sleeping well.
Right. 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 Right.
And for why? Like we can learn someone's FTP based off of power duration
Mm-hmm.
curves,
Mm-hmm.
algorithms, and we don't need to. In my opinion, we don't need to be always testing. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, no, I obviously agree with you because I don't do it either. And I use the races as tests, and and that's why I like to do sprint races, Olympic races. I like to do halves and like to do fulls. And you put those packages together, and you can get a good sense of where you are each time. And that's why I like to. I also like to race often.
Oh.
Because that's fun, and that is good to see where you are. And I think the one thing about intervals that I think is really important is for people to find what paces they can do and not to be afraid of some paces. If you're or to explore different paces. What's it like to run whatever minute per mile pace that you want to run at, or maybe it's a down the road type of goal, and to explore those paces is great. And I think that's really what I see interval training being uh, really positive for, is exploring what it feels like, what your heart rate is, what your power is, what your pace is, but really what it feels like to be able to run a certain pace.
No, I completely agree. But also, I would say that running too fast, like we talked about this before, like for Ironman, but even for people that are doing sprint distance, if your goal is to run, let's say a 20-minute 5K off the bike, which is
Hmm.
pretty, That's a
Yep.
pretty handy for most age groupers, right? You don't need to be doing intervals at the pace of 15.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just so far away from
Mm-hmm.
what you're actually going to be doing, and the risk of injury is so high at those higher
Yep.
paces. I think that that's a mistake, and I've read programs of people doing like 100 sprints,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I think that that's probably a mistake,
Mm-hmm.
for most age groupers, and this is not speaking to elite, like
Right. Right. Right.
athletes, different story, because like
Yep. Yep. Totally. Mm-hmm.
totally, I'm talking about like age groupers 40,
Mm-hmm.
50, 60, like that area.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be doing that,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly because of the risk reward ratio more than
Yeah.
any.
Mm-hmm.
On a bike, different, right? Like you want to do some 10-second sprints, and because you want to do some Zwift racing, and you think that that's going to help you.
Yeah.
That's a
Yep.
different story. But
And
a 10-second sprint on the bike is never going to help you in a triathlon.
right. 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 And I think where it does help is in that mental approach of what paces you can do and what they feel like, and then you say, okay, well, here's the pace I need to settle in on. I got to be patient during an iron distance race. I've got to be patient during a 70.3. I'm not trying to stretch my limits at that point, or find where my limits are. I'm really trying to find that patient pace that's going to be able to be sustained.
And I taking that just a little bit further, I agree with you. Like you need to know like what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things, like for example, like if I put someone like on 5 by 5 by 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, 5 times.
Yep.
Part of it is I want them to feel like when they're going too hard.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
that feeling of, oh man, like I'm not going to be able to make the last one.
Yep.
Okay. That's the feeling, or some of the feelings you're going to get in a race when you are going too hard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? You couldn't sustain that for 25 minutes with 5 minute breaks in between.
Right. Right.
You probably aren't going to be able to sustain that for an Olympic distance race,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
a half Ironman race, or even a sprint race.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, we get really caught up in racing, about, especially on the bike, going too hard.
Right. Right.
um, you climbing a hill, and it's a 5 minute hill, and you're significantly over your FTP. That's not sustainable, and
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
need to learn that's like that power is unsustainable, and how that's going to feel.
Well, and what's weird is sometimes you look at the math behind a pace and you say, well, if I only average this much faster, I'll take 5 minutes off or 10 minutes off. And I was thinking about it today on my swim. I swim 1,500 yards routinely and 60 lengths. And I was like, if I was only a second faster each length, that would be a minute faster overall. It's just a second, right?
It's just
Well, to do a second faster on every lane, it's going to take a little bit of work, and so it's not as easy as it may actually appear when you just look at the math and say just a second of length, and you'll be a minute faster in your 1,500. So,
no, it's so true. And then back to this thing about the epic interval workout, I'd also say just the epic workout,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
right? Like oftentimes I've seen people, they will do, getting ready for an Ironman. Oh, I'm gonna do a 7 hour ride.
yeah, yeah,
And once again, that you might have been better doing a 3 hour and a 4 hour ride on
mm-hmm,
different days, getting your 7 hours in and not destroying yourself.
right,
And that, don't get me wrong, like there's some fun rides you can do. Like, like I ride to Death Valley usually once a year. It's like an
yeah,
eight or
yeah,
9 hour thing. But I'm not doing it
for
like
training, yeah,
for training. I'm doing it
yeah,
just because I want to do it.
mm-hmm,
And I understand that it actually, like, the next day I feel pretty bad.
yeah. Well, I was just going to mention that is that not the feeling bad part, but the idea that sometimes you do a training just for the sake of enjoying the training, like you said, riding to Death Valley. I mean, there's rides that I do that I know it's not benefiting me training wise or fitness wise, but I enjoy it, and it's
Yeah.
what I want to do. And this is where we were talking earlier about the elite athlete is probably being very much much more delineating the choices to a finer degree than we are because they have that's their business and they need to be a little bit more attention to some of those details. But for, me, sometimes I like going for a long ride,
Oh,
and
me
I don't
too.
need to do it, but
Yeah,
I enjoy it.
yeah, yeah, and then that's the same with intervals. If you enjoy them, do
Yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm.
We're not saying that.
Yeah.
We're
Right.
just saying,
That's
like,
right.
bang for the buck, though,
Uh,
consistency is going to be
right.
better.
Yeah.
That's
If you enjoy going to the track and doing track work, that is
good.
great because it's a workout. It's going to benefit you, and
And especially if you
yeah,
don't have a history of it causing injury,
yeah, yeah,
like, go do it. Like, we're not saying don't do it for sure.
no, right, right.
Okay, next one. Simple metrics like program compliance tell us a lot. Keep the monitoring simple.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've talked about you in your book.
Oh, I know. I've got them right over there, my analog version. And I do actually miss that because it was just a simple, pen to paper, write in, this is my time I did, or my yardage, or whatever it was that how I was keeping track of it. But it was just simple. And then I'd be able to go back and look at it and say, oh, look at all these strings of workout, my consistency. That's what I've always shot for that. And I like that. So, but now I am in the digital age and using digital metrics, I guess. So,
So, for me as a coach, I look at a lot of the metrics, but I try
hmm
and tell the athletes not to.
yeah.
It's like, just let me do it. Like,
hmm
you let me do it. Don't get caught up in what my ATL is, my
yeah.
CTL, and even how many hours I'm doing or how fast I'm.
Right.
Like, don't, like, just let me do it.
hmm
If I didn't have a coach, I think I would be. Well, I don't have a coach, so and honestly, I look less at my metrics than I do at the people I
Yeah.
coach,
Yeah.
because I know what I feel,
Right.
right? So I
Right.
don't
Right.
have to rely on the metrics as much.
hmm
Um, but I think that we can make it really, really simple.
hmm
In and I think we talked about this a long time ago. If you could just create yourself a little spreadsheet
hmm
and you put in, the hours you trained
hmm
and on a 1 to 10 scale, how hard it was.
Yep. hmm
Created that, and
Yep. Right.
you could get like a training load based off of that, and
hmm
you week to week slowly increased it.
Yep.
And then once again throw some recovery weeks in there.
hmm
You would be very
Yep.
successful, and you wouldn't have to know all of these metrics. And I think people get or can get in today's day and age really overwhelmed
hmm hmm
with the
Well,
information.
all the wearable technology that we have, it's easy to get overwhelmed and you're getting all these data points. I put my heart rate monitor on when I go for a run. I hardly ever go back and look at my heart rate, but I still have those data. So if I want to go back, I can. But we have these watches, we have, foot pods that you wear. There's all these different data points. And, that there is some attractiveness to it because it is neat to go back and look at it. But at the end of the day, I agree with this performance tip is keep it simple. One of my favorite views in Training Peaks is just look at the calendar. And I just like to see all the days filled in, or not, they're not filled in. They're just, little color coded marks, if you will.
Yeah.
And then the one other thing I look at is hours per week. And I'm trying to, just slowly increase each week in terms of total training time. It's not, I don't even go back and look at my workouts and say, what did I do in those workouts? It's very simple metrics.
You can keep it very simple,
Mm-hmm.
and talk about once again like that slow progression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you slowly progressing? And the trick often comes around like when you have a lot of races,
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of interruptions to that,
Mm-hmm.
or an injury or an illness.
Mm-hmm.
um, John, one of my big challenges this winter so far is, I think now I've done it. Every single person I'm coaching has been sick at one point in the
Mm-hmm.
last,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
6 weeks,
Mm.
and that's a challenge,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
how to bring people back out of sickness, how to get
Mm-hmm.
them to train and then bring
Mm-hmm.
them back, because the metrics get messed up,
Right.
right? Heart rate goes up,
Mm-hmm.
effort goes down, and even if there were only like missed a week,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that physiologically can happen when you're sick.
Mm-hmm.
And some very simple metrics though, like power versus heart rate, right? Like,
Yeah.
throw somebody on a ergometer or indoor and just like Okay, we know that 2 weeks ago your power, when you were at a heart rate 150, your power was 200 watts.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's 150 and 170 watts.
Mm-hmm.
So physiologically, you're not recovered,
Right.
right? Because 1 week off is not, you should get recovered actually,
Mm-hmm.
but there's something still going on with you physiologically. So we need to back the training off.
Yeah.
And I know this is supposed to be simple, but that is so simple because it's just power and heart rate.
You know, the metrics, if you get too focused on them, they become demotivating.
That's right.
Because like you talk about, all of a sudden you have a bad day, or all of a sudden you had, some virus over a week or 2 weeks, and now you're looking at your watch and the workout, and you're like, oh, I'm not hitting the metrics that I was hitting before, and that can get frustrating. And instead, you just have to be a patient person and predict the future, that if you are consistent in your training, you will be fit again. But it's easy to get caught up in the details of analyzing all these different measurements that we can analyze.
And it's kind of crazy, right? Like, 'cause think about this. Like 10 years ago, we didn't have this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Years ago, we didn't have
Hmm.
this stuff. And you didn't know, like, that your fitness was as bad as it was until you went in a group ride or a group
Right,
run, and oh
right.
man,
Yeah.
and I think you're right. Like, and it can throw people into depression even.
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it,
Hmm.
it it's funny. Like, as I'm coming back from my surgery still and getting sick over Christmas and like a few rides this week, I'm just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I'm so bad right now.
Hmm.
And I got to keep telling myself, it's a long way. You got a long way to go. You
Yep.
were out a long time
Hmm.
and you got a
Hmm.
long way to get back.
Yeah,
But if you maintain and you stay consistent, you'll
yeah.
get there.
Hmm.
And I got to lie to myself, even. So, like, it's not really lying to myself, but I got to like cheerlead myself.
Yep.
And it's really hard.
Hmm.
It's hard for people. Yeah. So
No,
keep
and
going.
again, that's why I like this performance tip, is because if I can just check a box and say I did my swim workout today, that makes me feel better.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the swim work was. It doesn't matter if it was a good one or a bad one, or if it took me longer than I thought, or what have you. It's that mindset, that consistency is going to pay off in the long term.
It's interesting, on and I keep talking about Zwift because I've been Zwifting a lot. You can turn off the display
Okay.
and just have just you riding.
Yep.
And there's been a few times I've done that in the last few weeks because
Mm-hmm.
my numbers are so bad.
Yeah. Right. Right.
In
Right.
my mind, they're bad, right?
Yeah. Right.
But I just need to check the box. I did an hour workout.
Yeah.
Like, I
Right.
on the box for an hour, check the box,
Mm-hmm.
and just go off of how I feel
Yep.
instead of seeing like
Mm-hmm.
right in your face. This is your heart rate. This is your
Yep.
power,
Yep.
and because it is it's not easy.
No, it's not.
It's the simplest metric is you did the hour,
Yep.
right?
No, and you're
Work out.
spot on. It's not easy, and I think that's why I think people can be very purposeful in thinking about changing the way that they're looking at they're getting their workout in. Is keep this simple metric, and you'll you'll build that consistent program, and that's gonna and this is what he says is leads to program compliance.
Yeah,
So yeah.
good. Okay, the next one. Good scientists, coaches, and athletes all share curiosity, deliberateness, and intelligent failures.
I like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So this isn't this to me. This was one of the most interesting ones that I came across because we have to be curious.
Hmm.
Like, as John, both you and I, we're scientists.
Right.
We're both athletes. I do coaching. If I'm not curious all of the time,
Hmm.
like, what are the best tires to run this year,
Yeah.
John?
Right.
Like, I should be curious about that.
Hmm.
How should I prep my chains? We talked about that. Like, what is the best thing to do? How I'm gonna, what helmet is most aero?
Hmm.
These are all curiosities, right? And when I do fail because I chose the wrong tire,
Hmm.
I failed, but it was an intelligent failure, right? Like,
Hmm.
and I've made that mistake, and I've made mistakes along the way, but it was all, I consider those things intelligent failures. And
Right.
it's the same with training plans.
No, I love it. And you know, when we're being trained to be a scientist or training someone, training students, really, this sounds so odd, but a lot of the education is about learning to ask questions. And as you ask questions, you actually learn to ask even better questions. And then you ask questions that are ultimately testable. And you can then do an experiment and then objectively look at an answer to that question, which is all, that science approach to, to learning. So so it is all about um, trying to ask questions. I think you're spot on with that. And so a lot of times the courses that we actually offer, and especially when I'm working with graduate students, I tell them straight up, I'm like, you're not going to learn as much from the courses that you take as you are from your experiences in the laboratory or interacting with community members and what have you, because you're applying that knowledge. Your courses are really, designed to give you nuts and bolts information that then you can start using in research projects and what have you. And yeah, that intelligent failures, I like that. That's I always say, don't be afraid of failing. And I think this is in line with that, is because I think when you do fail, you actually, if you can not be afraid of that to begin with, then you can take a step back and say, why did I not do what I was intending to do or what I thought I could do? And I think that's where you learn more. I always say DNFs in a race. People, they're, oh, I'll never DNF. I'll crawl across the finish line if I have to. You know what? Sometimes it's not your day, and sometimes there's things that happen, and sometimes it's the best choice is to walk away and then learn from that, and then figure out how to do the race better, whether it's the preparation or the event or what have you.
And sometimes we take risks.
Yeah.
We take
Mm-hmm.
risks as scientists sometimes, and we take. I mean, I take risks with athletes. I tell them we're taking a risk.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, I've taken risks with athletes where we purposely, and I don't do this often, but we ran too fast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we also knew that based off of who was going to be in the race, and they wanted to qualify for this, and
Yeah.
they actually had, and most often I'm conservative with people off the
Mm-hmm.
bike.
Mm-hmm.
I've done stuff where like, hey, like, you know what? If you get off the bike and and you're in this situation, you may actually have to take a risk and you might fail.
Yeah. Right.
But if you don't take the risk, you
Mm-hmm.
you probably aren't going to reach the goal that you wanted, because just
Mm-hmm.
based off of where you're at and where the training is, and like, so let's take the risk. And
Mm-hmm.
once again, that's an intelligent failure. It's understanding that there's a chance here that we're going to fail,
Yeah.
but you're going in with the knowledge that this is risky and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pro athletes do this all the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? Especially in triathlon, many overbike
Mm-hmm.
because they have to,
Right.
right? Because if they don't, they're not on the podium and they don't get paid.
Mm-hmm. The
And
racing. Mm-hmm.
they blow up on mile 8 of a half Ironman,
Mm-hmm.
but they took the risk because, and we're going to talk to Justin about this. He's, I think he's done this. I don't know. I'm going to
Yeah.
ask this
Yeah.
question. And it's okay, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I've worked with a lot of high level athletes that have taken calculated risks, understanding that they might fail.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way you can get better and to learn yourself.
No, spot on. And a lot of times it ends up giving more motivation, maybe not even only for yourself, for others. I think of Julie Moss as the classic failure of having to, crawl that last whatever 100 meters or what have you, but yet that motivated so many people. And, so that failure of sorts, if you want to even call it that, um, really ends up being a motivating, iconic moment. And so I like this intelligent failure because I think if you approach an event and with that mindset that you're okay with intelligent failures, then you're not going to be afraid to fail. And if you're towing the start line and you're afraid to push the pace, if you're afraid of the distance, you're afraid that you don't have enough fitness, that can be a really tough day to deal with. But if you're not afraid of that and you're being intelligent about the approach, then you're really going to end up having a successful day, even though you may even put it in an intelligent failure category, I guess.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this is probably not something that in the middle of my triathlon career I would have
Right.
accepted. But
Hmm.
with time and with wisdom, I think that the intelligent failure actually is a really good model.
Hmm.
So what about curiosity? Like, could you be a good triathlete and just from an athlete side and not be curious?
That's interesting. I think you can be a good triathlete and not be curious, but I think a healthy triathlete is curious. And I think a mature triathlete is curious too, because we don't we we don't know what we don't know. And by expanding our level of knowledge and asking good questions, you I think end up being a better triathlete in the long term, as opposed to I'm always going to do this one thing, triathlon, whatever sport it is, and that's all I'm going to do. And if you're not curious to explore, maybe it's okay to go skiing, or maybe it's okay to do something different, or maybe I'll try a different pair of shoes, or maybe I'll try a different setup. If you don't have that curiosity, I don't think that it expands you, and I don't think in the long term you'll be as good of a triathlete.
Yeah, I always think about this with like maybe like even your pre-race meal, right?
Mm,
So I always have the same pre-race meal
yeah, yeah, right, right, right.
because it doesn't bother my stomach. Okay,
Hmm.
good. But could there
Hmm.
be a better one
Yeah,
that
right.
actually doesn't bother your stomach and helps you perform
Yeah,
better,
right.
right? Well, that's curiosity. Like,
Hmm.
well, should I try something
Yeah.
different? And obviously, we always, we believe in, hey, don't try something new race day.
Hmm.
But I'd also contend that sometimes you have to,
Yeah, right.
because I can't, like, especially like the pre-race meal stuff.
Hmm.
It's really an interesting one. You can practice it, but you can't.
No, that's right. Hmm.
Stress level is completely different. The
Yep.
sleep patterns are different.
Yep.
If you've especially if you've traveled at all, your circadian
Hmm.
rhythms are different. So yeah, like to me, like if you want to continually try to be better,
Yeah.
I mean that maybe, and maybe that's my mentality as a triathlete. I want to always try and be better,
Hmm.
and maybe that's not a healthy way, right?
Yeah, yeah, but I think on the nutrition piece, you're spot on with that, and that you can't replicate race day. But by doing some things early on, you maybe get closer,
Right.
closer to having some good principles that you can follow on that day or that morning or day before. But without even trying something different, you won't ever find that.
No,
Now, there's a limit too, right? I mean,
yeah, of course.
you can't be changing everything every day, and you've got
Well,
to.
it's just kind of like, we talk about it as a scientist. Like, you have a hypothesis, you need to test your hypothesis. But if you
Hmm.
have too many
Hmm.
uh, variables, then you don't know if
Yeah,
the hypothesis was,
yeah.
what the answer was, what you thought was causing that answer. So no, I think being curious and willing to fail at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, and it's interesting the way the sport of triathlon has sort of evolved. Is I think triathletes are naturally curious because they may be coming from a single sport background, and then they get curious. Well, what if I add swimming to this, or what if I'm a swimmer and I add biking, and you get drawn to this sport because of some curiosity. So a lot of people may be looking at this world and saying, I don't know what's with this one, but it may be because it's already intrinsic.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I think, like, this named a few things. It named scientists, coaches, athletes, and the coach should be curious too. Like,
Hmm.
I don't coach people the same way I did 2 years ago,
Yeah, yeah.
and because I'm curious, right? Like, I want
Hmm.
to try new things and try and become better,
Yeah.
and that's a good thing, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right, should we move on to the next one?
Let's do
We're
the next one.
knocking these out. Uh, Triangulation and heads up displays help pilots and athletes alike stay on target.
Hmm.
I don't really know about this one. Triangulation and heads up displays.
Well,
help
and
pilot.
I actually think of triangulation and heads-up display a little bit differently, that they're different from each other. Triangulation to me means you're getting different perspectives, and you have to pull those perspectives together to be able to understand something. So obviously, to find your location on a map. I mean, you used to do the cross-country running with a compass, right?
Of course, I know how to
Yeah.
triangulate. Trust me.
And triangulation was probably very important to be able to figure out where you were on a map, and you identify a couple of different points, and then you intersect them, and you say, oh, this is where I am, or maybe most likely where I am.
I got lost several times. I got to be honest.
Because that's where I say most likely this is where you are. But yeah, because it's not easy. But same thing with triathlon. I mean, you've got a problem. You sort of got to triangulate it because it's usually not a single reason for a calf problem or a single reason for GI problem that you're sort of alluding to. There's multiple things going on, and you got to triangulate. You got to have some different perspectives and look at it from different lenses to ultimately figure out what the source of an issue is. And even then, you may not figure it out. You may narrow it down, but you need different perspectives. So that's how I look at the triangulation piece.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because we're trying to do like, this is going to sound kind of like cocky or whatever. We're trying to
Hmm.
do something very special. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
triathlon's hard,
Yeah.
right? And to really figure out how to do it well, it
Hmm.
takes a lot of information coming in from a lot of different
Right.
places.
Right.
And if that's triangulation or whatever
Hmm.
verb you want to use, um, to describe it, I think that, I mean, and going back to the last question or the last statement, like that's the exciting part about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
for the most part, like for example, running, we know how to like train runners really well. Like,
Hmm. Hmm.
and cycling, same thing. But we still are in some gray area about training triathletes,
Yeah, totally.
and trying to put all of the pieces together. And
Hmm.
we've talked about it before, like doing 9 or 10 or 11 sessions a week.
Hmm.
Very few sports other than like, maybe youth swimming where they're doing double days all the time, do this,
Yeah, right.
right? And so you're always collecting data from all over. And I'm not saying data like analytic data, I'm saying
Hmm.
data in your brain of trying to like just fit this into your life. Even how do
Hmm.
you triangulate the scheduling?
Yeah.
you know I have once again, I put a lot of stuff on people's training peaks.
Hmm.
Oh my gosh, how are they going to do that this week?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they figure it out.
Yeah, right, right,
Sometimes they miss 1 or 2 sessions, and but I'm like, man, I regularly put 9 or 10 sessions on every person's thing every week.
right, right.
And man, that is like, think about that. And they all have jobs
Yeah.
for the most part. And and like, how do you triangulate your schedule even
Hmm. Hmm.
just to like make it happen?
No, totally. Yeah, yeah, I love it. Well,
And
and
then triangulate even like sleep and
mm,
and nutrition and
mm,
recovery and
yeah.
all of those things. Like, you have to be so aware.
Hmm.
Like, it's
A,
special.
a lot of moving parts. And with the heads up display part, I was thinking about when I worked at cardiac rehab, and this is speaking to the point of all these different things that you have going on that you're talking about. I remember in cardiac rehab, I was standing there. Every patient would come in, and we would put a three-lead EKG remote monitor on them, and it would be transmitted to a main monitor. And I remember my job was to set up the exercise program for these folks. And I remember watching the monitor, and I'm like, wow, this one person's EKG is going really crazy. And I call the nurse over, and Rick was the nurse, and he goes, come here, John, let me show you something. So he walks me over to the patient who's looking just fine. He's just exercising away. And what had happened was one of the sensors had fallen off, one of the stickers. And he just fixed that. And then he comes over and said, now the EKG is fine, right? And oh, yeah, no, the EKG looks a lot better. And he said, don't treat the monitor. He says, treat the patient. And I think that this is partly what that heads up display idea is here is you've got to have your eyes on your target. You can see the different metrics there, but you're still looking in front of you and trying to get to a certain spot versus really focusing on maybe the dials or the sensors that may be in the cockpit in this case. That's my long story on that part.
Oh, I think it's true, and I think triathletes can be really bad about that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, yeah, because so many triathletes, because it's such a difficult thing
Mm-hmm.
to try and balance these three sports. They have to be very schedule oriented,
Yeah.
right? And oftentimes they just look at the next session and they don't
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, I didn't have lunch today.
Right, right,
I
right.
got to run after work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they'd probably be better off, honestly, just having some food
Mm-hmm.
and actually doing that run under fueled.
Yeah, right.
And they're not like, yeah, they don't have that heads up display. Basically, like they're looking at the metric and they're looking at the training plan.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I tell this to the people I coach, try to at least, is I never want to hear, oh, I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to do it, right? You get to,
Right.
you, but it should only be happening, in my opinion, if everything else is taken care of.
Yeah.
Like
That's a
that's my.
great mindset. A great mindset to coach. Yeah.
But how many triathletes do you hear? Oh man, I'd like to do that. I like to, I have to run.
Right, right.
You have to run.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
Yeah.
Now I've used it as an excuse because I don't want to hang out with somebody. Oh, I'd love
Right.
to, but I have to go. My coach is a real jerk, and so I got
That's right.
to do it. But
Oh, I love it. Well, this jumps right into the next point here.
yeah, so delayed periodization models, or sorry, detailed. I don't say delayed.
Yeah.
Detailed periodization models are generally overrated and undervalidated. This
Hmm.
is so good. Oh, I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. Right.
So, John, do you want to tell people what a periodization model is?
Well, periodization is planning out different sections of a long-term training program. And so you have different phases within that training program or different periods or periods of time that you're going to do certain things. And so the whole idea behind periodization is to sort of chunk together different types of workouts at different points of a training program to try to maximize ultimately your fitness and performance.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
And I first learned about these when I was an undergrad student in Canada. I mean,
Yep.
probably 1999, 1991.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Actually, even before that, when I was doing orienteering, and I was working with a coach, and they're like, okay, we need to plan out your schedule for the whole year.
Mm-hmm.
Here's
Mm-hmm.
your 8 races, and
Yep.
here's where we're going to do this, and we're going to add
Yep.
strength here, and do this, and I had this beautiful looking calendar with these charts
Mm-hmm.
on it. I still remember, it was on my desk. It was like laminated on my desk,
Yep.
and it was overwhelming. And I rarely stuck to it, to be honest
Yeah,
with
right, right, right.
you. I was back then a lot going off of, like, I worked with a coach, but a lot of it was just going off of feel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter that it said, hey, we're doing this, like, this is your phase you're in,
Yep.
if my body wasn't ready for it. you
Mm-hmm.
know and the problem is and they're undervalidated, meaning that the research doesn't really say that they work that well. And part of the reason, in my experience, is stuff happens. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what happens in the middle of your big run block if you get sick?
Yeah.
Well, what do you do? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
everything, like, this whole year plan is right, or you get an
Yep.
Achilles, and now we shift. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I actually am a strong believer for them, and there's times to do stuff. Don't be wrong. Like, I believe in, like, doing run blocks at a certain period of time, but
Sure.
not in the
Right, right.
grand scheme of like a whole year.
Yeah, right.
But I do think that there are some pieces, John, that are important, and the one I believe in is actually having structured rest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like, I do think that the only real thing I'm concerned with periodization with most of the athletes I work with is, like, we actually schedule rest.
Well, you're gonna jump into number 9 by
I know,
mentioning that.
but not even rest days, but rest blocks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
When you finish your last race of the season,
Mm-hmm.
there should be a rest.
Right.
And it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, it might be
Mm-hmm.
4 weeks, depending on the season.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the athletes I'm working with are going really long. into the season,
Mm-hmm.
right? They want to race Indian Wells or Miami or something, Ironman Florida, and that's in December or
Yeah.
November. And they also want to do Oceanside,
Right.
right? And so one of the things that I've talked about with those athletes that want to go long is
Mm-hmm.
we need a rest period in the middle of summer.
Right.
And like it's in the plan, like, hey, you're gonna, after this race, you're gonna take 2 weeks off in the middle of summer. I know it's the prime time to get out and do stuff and
Mm-hmm.
to go out and hike and do some other things, but that, like, those are two things that I believe in for periodization.
Mm-hmm.
But it's only like that we're gonna rest.
Well, to your point, if you sketch out the intensity of a training plan, it should never be a straight line flat. It's not
Exactly.
always going to be the same every day, even though we're talking about consistency, nor is it going to be linear. It has this ebb and flow of intensity. And I agree with you, that part of periodization is the part that you want to sort of dial in and pay attention to. But Silas is spot on that a lot of these periodization programs have never been validated, and often they've been done to demonstrate their effectiveness by taking a group of untrained people in the beginning, and then whatever you do, they end up getting better. And so it's always been a limitation of this type of work of exploring different types of training programs. It's not an easy thing to do. And most of people who will be listening to this podcast or video cast, they're already fit. And so, you're looking for small changes in fitness over a period of time versus someone who's coming from the couch. And if you do anything with them, they're going to have a big change in fitness. And so that's part of the problem with training programs and research on training programs is who are you working with, and how much of a difference are you really expecting over a period of time.
And I think a lot of the early periodization work was done with team sport athletes. And
Team sport and strength training too. Yeah.
and the team sport athlete, let's just say the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are both Knights fans, right? It used to, if you think about it, it used to be a little bit shorter season, and then they did nothing in the off season.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, like it was golf. It was golf time.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, that's not what happens anymore. Like professional athletes, they're
Right.
training, they're training year round, but there are such ebbs and flows, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
off season is the time to build strength
Yep.
and to build some maybe endurance. And in the season, they have to do less because they're playing games all of the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yep.
And maybe at a certain point in the season, they need to actually down regulate a little bit to get ready for the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
They know the intensity is going to be like, and so that's a different thing than a
Mm-hmm.
triathlete that wants to, peak at Oceanside and then peak in December again,
Yeah.
and
Right.
this race and this race. And it's different. And the thing
Mm-hmm.
with triathlon is every athlete's different.
Mm-hmm.
I have people I work with, they want to do 2 races a year.
Yeah. Right. Right.
I have people that want to do 10.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a
So
big difference. Yeah.
it's a big
Mm-hmm.
difference. Yeah.
Mm.
So, and you're right about like the research on taking those untrained athletes,
Mm-hmm.
and that, and yeah, maybe we have some untrained athletes listening, and maybe a periodization plan would work, but I think there's other ways to do it that are
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
probably, we agree, are more
Mm.
efficacious.
Well, how many more of these you want to tackle tonight?
I think we should stop,
Yeah.
because we have 4 left. So let's stop. Next week, once again, we got Justin Reale. He's going to be joining us. I'm super excited to have him. We're going to try and tailor the talk around aerodynamics and aerodynamic testing, because I know he's done a lot of that. And super excited about that. John, it's supposed to get cold.
Yeah.
Put your long cut in tomorrow, okay?
We're just looking at the weather. It may rain, so we may be inside some more, but that's okay. We're still getting some good training in.
My favorite Zwift ride is on Sunday mornings at 10 if you want to join.
Oh,
It's
there you go.
100,
What's the favorite Zwift ride?
it's a 100-kilometer ride,
Mm.
and it's actually pretty fun. They have 2 groups.
Yeah.
They start 15 minutes apart, and so you get the C group and they call it the B group, but it's really an A group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is you have the first group that they're going to go around 2.5 to 2.8 watts per kilogram.
Mm-hmm.
You have a stick at that. They have a fence so you can't go past.
Okay.
And then the group behind tries to catch them,
Oh, cool.
and they're all like 4 watts per kilogram.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And I've done that ride. I think I've probably done it 15 times,
Hmm.
and I've done it in the back group and barely hung on
Yeah,
because it's
right.
hard. 4 watts per kilogram.
That's
Even
a
if you're
lot.
tracking,
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah.
Um, but I have way more fun in the front group. It just, it's like zone two, take
Hmm.
it, and then once the group catches you, you can actually join on to them.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and sometimes they catch you around like 65 kilometers. I've done it once where they never caught us.
Oh, nice.
All the way to 100 kilometers. I've been on where they caught us at 90 kilometer 99 out of
Oh.
100. I don't know. Just to me, it's
Pre-
kind of fun. Like,
Predator prey.
exactly, and you
Yeah.
can choose which one to be. But
Yeah.
if you're going to be on the predator side, you got to be very,
Yeah,
very
you could be ready to
strong.
go. Well, and if you're doing the prey side, sounds like you still got to be
You
ready
gotta
to
be
push
strong.
too. So,
Uh, It's it, but they're really good about like if you get dropped, we'll go back and pull you up.
okay.
Um, yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Mm.
They've changed the name. It's something like workout with the psychopaths or something
Oh, nice.
like name, but it's
Yeah,
10 a.m. on Sundays. If anyone wants to jump in.
awesome. Well, you have a good weekend. Enjoy the indoor riding, indoor training, and I saw Cosmo back there a little while ago.
He
So,
was. I don't know what happened to him, but he's listening in.
all
I gotta
right.
get Cosmo to download the episodes. Maybe I should do that. Download the episodes, and when we leave, just play them.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, Ted and John they're just talking again. Okay,
Oh.
good. Everything's normal.
I love it. I love it.
Hey, have a great weekend, John.
All right, you too.